Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to today's DNS session. We are going to have a discussion on today's newspaper, The Hindu, Delhi edition, dated 14 July 2021. We shall pick up articles important for our civil service exam and discuss them as per the demand of the exam. This article is from page number 7, Disable Unconstitutional Sections. Recently, during the hearing of a case filed by People's Union for Civil Liberty, that after years of declaring Section 66A of the IT Act 2000 as unconstitutional, cases were still being registered under this section of the Act. We will take this opportunity to first have a look as to the recent judgments of Supreme Court declaring certain sections of IPC, CRPC or other legislations in general as unconstitutional. And then we will have a discussion as to what's the importance of courts declaring certain aspect of the law as unconstitutional. Then finally we'll come to the point as to how to disable unconstitutional sections. There are certain human errors at the level of SHO, people who registered FIRs, police officers at the station level who register FIRs. They are unaware of these judgments being passed. They are holding the old previously published law books in which those sections are still alive. So there must be checks in the system itself to identify if any FIR has been registered under sections that already have been declared as unconstitutional. First of all, for the purpose of mains examination, you must be handy with some of the rulings, judgments of Supreme Court that has resulted in considerable reform of laws. Beginning with the case that is the context of the article, Shreya Singhal case. In Shreya Singhal versus Union of India, Supreme Court declared Section 66A of the IT Act 2000 as unconstitutional because this section made online posting of information considered as grossly offensive, a criminal punishable act. Supreme Court declared this as being violative of Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution, and it is not covered under the reasonable restrictions defined in Article 19(2). There was another aspect that Supreme Court highlighted, that this section has a very general expression. It is open-ended, undefined, and therefore arbitrary. Supreme Court, via various judgments, has removed arbitrariness in legislation and the executive process. Law must not be arbitrary. This is a laid down principle in the legal jurisprudence. Way back in 1983 actually, in Mithu versus State of Punjab case, Supreme Court struck down Section 303. Section 303 actually provided for capital punishment for a murder by a person serving a life term in another case. Meaning a person serving life term in another case somehow gets to murder another person, automatically he will be given capital punishment. This was struck down by the Supreme Court as being violative of Article 21 and 14. The reason was not that this capital punishment was being too harsh for a person already serving life term in another case and after that he has murdered a person. The reason for striking it down was that the only punishment mentioned was capital punishment, and it did not give judiciary the power to exercise its discretion. Then recently in 2018, in Navteej Singh Johar versus Union of India, Supreme Court struck down Section 377 of the IPC. This section criminalized unnatural sex. Supreme Court declared Section 377 as unconstitutional. Unnatural sex here implies any sex apart from sex between opposite gender. In Joseph Shine case, Supreme Court held that adultery as defined in Section 497 of the IPC is arbitrary, discriminatory, violative of dignity of woman and therefore unconstitutional. Supreme Court held that wife is not the property of husband. Husband is not the master of wife. So adultery in this case was defined as adultery without the permission of the husband. That permission of the husband was the problematic thing in this section. Previously, Supreme Court has described some measure so that Section 498A is not misused. This section is related with dowry. There are women's rights, but there are also men's rights, and men should not be unnecessarily harassed using this provision of dowry. You must have some examples ready at the tip of your finger so that off the cuff, you can write certain points as to how Supreme Court has reformed the law of the land. Then you must be able to understand and appreciate why these reformation is necessary. First of all, it helps in progressive realization of rights. Progressive realization of right is a doctrine in legal jurisprudence where progressively, as the society progresses, as the time lapses, more and more rights must be conferred on citizens as and when the state is ready to provide. Otherwise, this expectation of progressive realization of right is too unrealistic from executive and legislatures. For example, Supreme Court in case Puttaswamy case declared right to privacy as a fundamental right. As we have just talked about in the Tej Singh Johar case, when Section 377 was struck down, Supreme Court made an observation that an individual's right to develop one's individuality against the demand of social conformity must be recognized. Individual rights, liberties, freedom, these have to be protected, and progressively so with time. Supreme Court in Sabrimala judgment has declared that individual freedom prevails over group rights, even in the matter of religion. Similar observation has been made in the Joseph Shine case. Justice Chanchud made the observation that Section 497 subordinates women and creates a dent on individual identity of women. When laws become old, they have to be reformed as per the prevailing morality. This helps in progressive realization of rights. For this, laws needs to be reformed and courts help in reforming the laws. In MC Mehta case, Supreme Court declared that right to live in a pollution-free environment is at par with right to life. So right to live in pollution-free environment is part of Article 21. These reformation of laws helps in setting a higher bar, a higher standard for rights of citizens. Supreme Court in Dong Liam Kham versus Union of India stated that the principle of non-refoulement is part of guarantee under Article 21, irrespective of nationality. Principle of non-refoulement means if a person under threat from his own state has come to seek refuge in your state, you cannot return him back unless the situation normalizes in his home state. As we have already talked about, liberty and freedom of citizens are protected by courts when they reform the laws. The one in the context, Shreya Singhal case. Supreme Court struck down Section 66A of the IT Act. Supreme Court previously in Ranga Rajan versus P. Jagjeevan Ram case has said that mere threat to public order cannot be the ground to suppress freedom of expression. Supreme Court in Kedarnath versus the state of Bihar has said that sedition charges can be imposed only if it involves intention to create disorder or incitement to violence. Mere criticism of the government should not call for sedition charges. Comments against government, however strongly worded, if does not involve violence, are not sedition. Supreme Court observed this in Common Cause versus Union of India case in 2016. Liberty, freedom, choices. Supreme Court has enabled that, enforced that, protected that for citizens of India. In the Aadhaar verdict, Supreme Court has declared that Aadhaar cannot be made mandatory. But the Aadhaar project was not considered unconstitutional on the ground that it does not create a surveillance state. It does not impinge into the liberty, privacy of citizens. But Supreme Court did modify the Aadhaar Act that was passed by the Parliament. Courts reforming laws is necessary because there are areas in which the executive and legislatures will not venture. In Lily Thomas case, Supreme Court declared that MPs and MLAs convicted of a crime and awarded a minimum of 2 years of imprisonment loses membership of the House. In the Association for Democratic Reform and People's Union for Civil Liberty versus Union of India case, Supreme Court upheld the previously given judgment by High Court mandating that Election Commission must obtain and disclose the background information of the candidates. Similarly, Supreme Court has called for police reform in Prakash Singh case. Supreme Court has done electoral reform, asking nota to be compulsory. Supreme Court in the Nalsa case has activated the executive and legislature to protect the rights of transgenders. Courts having a check on laws like this also ensures that the political party's ideology is not imposed on citizens. The nation is governed by law. There is rule of law in the democracy. It ensures that there is complete justice. Supreme Court introduced the provision of curative petition in Ashok Hurra case. And section 377 that was struck down, as we have talked about, was struck down through curative petition. So if it's such an important thing, it must be taken proactively by the judiciary. And when judiciary does reform in legislation, there is absolute no question of that not getting implemented by the executive. It will call for the contempt of the court and it will break down the principle of rule of law. So police officers at all levels must be educated on the latest developments, provisions of the law that has been declared unconstitutional. Superintendent of police must have an oversight on this. Officers doing lapse either by mistake or deliberately must be reported negatively in the annual confidential reports. A suggestion has come from the Attorney General that there must be mention in brackets near the provision that the provision has already been struck down. Presently, what happens in the law book, even in the updated ones, the sections that has been struck down are still there. But in the footnote, it has been mentioned that these sections have been struck down. So maybe officers going by the rule book, they are doing it by mistake, they are not reading the footnote. And more than 1500 cases that have been registered under Section 66A of the IT Act 2002 in the last 5 years have been by mistake. So it must be made clear in the law book that these provisions have been already struck down. Additionally, there must be check in the system itself to identify the provisions of the law under which the cases are being registered. That will obviously help in tracking the cases, the kind, the nature, and also prevent cases getting registered under the provisions that have been struck down already. The author has given a very good suggestion that the unconstitutional sections of IBC must be disabled in the crime and criminal tracking network and systems. As per the directive of Supreme Court, the FIRs getting registered in the police station must get uploaded on the network within 24 to 72 hours. If the system itself can identify that the cases registered are unlawful, then such embarrassing condition like cases getting registered for years and years under sections that have been struck down will not arise. There is an article on page number 1, PM rejigs cabinet panel. The cabinet panel that the headline of the article says is actually the cabinet committee. New members have been added to the cabinet committee. We shall discuss this topic of cabinet committee from the perspective of prelims examination. We'll see some important pointers. Cabinet committees are basically subcommittees within the union cabinet. The purpose is to increase the efficiency of working of union cabinet. Smaller groups are made, these are called as subcommittees, to look into specific issues so that there is some in-depth analysis of the issue. Decision can be fast and effective. Cabinet committees are basically made on the principle of division of labor and effective delegation in the parliamentary system. These help in the interministerial coordination. They help to keep check on the arbitrary decision making by any particular minister. And by virtue of that, they help in enforcing the principle of collective responsibility in a parliamentary democracy. But cabinet committees have not been directly mentioned in the constitution. The power in the hands of the Prime Minister to make the cabinet committees, rename them, form new ones, dissolve them, expand them as and when the need arises comes from the Government of India Transaction of Business Rules 1961. And the Government of India has made this rule as per the mandate given by the Constitution under Article 77(3). Clause 3 of Article 77 reads like this: the President shall make rules for more convenient transaction of the business of Government of India and for the allocation of ministers of the said business. So for convenient transaction, for conduct of the business of the government in smooth and effective manner, cabinet committees are formed. So it means that the cabinet committees are extra constitutional bodies. Constitution of India has said that the President will have power to make rules for convenient transaction of business. And the Government of India Transaction of Business Rules 1961 has been made accordingly. And according to this rule, the Prime Minister can make cabinet committees. But cabinet committees can neither be called as constitutional body nor statutory body. There are presently 8 cabinet committees, and if Prime Minister is part of a cabinet committee, by default he will head the cabinet committee. Presently, Prime Minister heads 6 cabinet committee. He does not head the Committee on Parliamentary Affairs and Committee on Allocations. You must take special note that usually cabinet ministers are part of cabinet committees. However, there is no such bar according to the Government of India Transaction of Business Rules 1961 on non-cabinet ministers to become member of cabinet committees. Cabinet committees are powerful bodies. They are not just for deliberation, but they can take decisions as well. However, decisions taken by the cabinet committees can well be reviewed by the cabinet. There are presently 8 cabinet committees. 2 of them, the Cabinet Committee on Investment and Growth and the Committee on Employment and Skill Development, were formed in 2019. The Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs, this is headed by the Home Minister, and Parliamentary Committee on Accommodation, which look after the allocation of government resources like bungalows, etc., to the ministers. This is headed by any senior minister. Rest of the cabinet committees are headed by the Prime Minister. This is a lead article, very important for the exam. The upcoming crisis in Indian federalism. This upcoming crisis is related to the year 2026, when the time limit for which the seats for the Lok Sabha has been frozen will lapse. This article raises a very important question. There is a very important, in the electoral democracy, the principle is that vote of every citizen must be equal. So the votes in Lok Sabha is proportional to the population of the state. So seat reserved in Lok Sabha in a particular state is proportional to the population of that state. Article 81 of our constitution says that each state is allotted a number of seats in the Lok Sabha in such a manner that the ratio between the number and its population was as close to uniform as possible. But for your prelims exam, you must remember that this provision does not apply for states having population less than 6 million, 60 lakh. Via 42nd Constitutional Amendment in 1976, the number of seats per state has been frozen. Similarly, as per the Article 80 to our Constitution, the 4th schedule to the Constitution provides for allocation of seats to the states and union territories of Rajya Sabha. And the allocation of seats to the states and union territories is made on the basis of population of the state. But population for the purpose of reservation of seats to the parliament from the state has been frozen in 1976. Ever since, the population of different states has been growing at different rate. So presently, the number of seats reserved in the parliament from states are not proportional to the population of the state. But the crucial principle of electoral democracy, that is one person, one vote or equal value of vote, has been compromised in the larger interest of the nation to have control on population. The population that is considered for the reservation of seats to parliament is as per 1971 census. Was frozen in 1976 as per this population number was frozen for the purpose of deciding the number of seats from each state in the year 1976 by 42nd Constitutional Amendment. But it was frozen till 2001. Later, this year was extended to 2026. The obvious reason for freezing the population number was to encourage the states to adopt population control measures. In population control, southern states have done exceedingly well. The fertility rate has gone well below 2, though population is actually now declining. In many of the northern states, the fertility rate remains well above the replacement rate of 2.1. So the population of many northern states is still increasing. And come the year 2026, if the government was to defreeze what has been frozen since 1971, there are going to be problems. The states that have performed well in family planning will be penalized, and states that took little interest in population control may be indirectly rewarded. They can end up getting more number of seats in the parliament. To allay such a problematic situation, generally there is always a compromise between democratic principles and the principle of federalism. In the federal structure, smaller states always have fear of getting bulldozed, of getting dominated by the larger ones. There's a fear that they will get a smaller share of economic pie. There's a fear that the political ideology will be imposed on the smaller states. Globally, to allay such a fear, the compromise has always been struck. The best example comes from United States of America, which in true sense is a federation. USA has adopted many constitutional measures to protect the interest of smaller states. For example, the national power over the states are limited. There are only two lists, the union list and the state list. There are no concurrent list or the residuary power with the center. Each state in USA, regardless of its size, regardless of the population number, have two seats in the Senate. So the smaller states actually has a proportional greater role in the national governance. Thirdly, as you all must be aware that presidents are elected by electoral votes of the entire state as a whole. The presidential candidates have to win the states rather than earn majority of the national votes. So if you win the state marginally, suppose you have just 51-52%, you will win the entire seat from the state. Suppose the presidential candidate also has won another state, but this time also very marginally, 51-52% vote, and he has lost the third state brutally. Maybe he has got just less than 5% of the vote, and the same goes for other states. Overall, maybe he is winning, but overall, the situation may arise that he will not have the majority of national votes. In this scenario, the say of the state increases. One state alone can decide the fate of the election, and the majority opinion of the state will not be overshadowed by the voting pattern in other states. So, majority opinion of each state is taken rather than the majority opinion nationwide. But then, USA is a true federation. We are not. We can adopt certain measures of federation, strengthen them, but we are quasi federal structure. So, this setup, this presidential form of election system, cannot be adopted in India. We are parliamentary democracy. But what can be done is to learn from other federations or quasi federal structures to improve the delegation of powers to the state. You understand, if the states are sure that their power, their rights will not be impinged upon, their existence will not come into threat, then they will not bother much as to how many seats they have in Rajya Sabha, how many seats they have in Lok Sabha. They'll be doing just fine irrespective of that. So, more power needs to be delegated to the states in order for this anxiety, for this uneasiness, the threat of upsetting the federal structure because of increase in population in few states and overall contraction of population in other states. This will also be in the overall interest for long term of our federation. The author suggests that the power of the state vis-a-vis center as contained in Schedule 7, the three lists, must change to the advantage of states. Also, the power of the center vis-a-vis dealing with boundaries of states must be decreased. The states must have greater say in alteration of boundaries so that they do not fear of their dissolution or separation, they do not fear of their existence. The author also suggests that the role and composition of Rajya Sabha must be expanded. We have seen the scuttling of the role of Rajya Sabha in context of many of the important bills being introduced as money bill. The author is of the opinion that the constitutional changes or changes in the financial relation between the center and the state must require consent of all or nearly all states, not the simple majority. Presently, majority of the states' opinion is required in matters impinging the interest of the states. But general constitutional change does not require this say. And the financial redistribution that is done on the recommendation of Finance Commission. Similarly, certain sensitive issues like the one related with language, religion, they must be made inviolate. State must be assured that changes will not be done in these regard. There is also suggestion from certain quarter that serious thoughts must be given to break down the bigger states into smaller ones. This way, the fear that certain states will dominate the national politics by the virtue of saying more number of MPs will wither away. There is one counter argument to these arguments. It is often suggested that there is a need for a strong center to keep the states together. In absence of a strong center, the states will start weaning away from the federation. But this argument does not hold much water in the light of 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment. The whole point of these amendments was to deepen the democracy at grassroots level. Delegation of power never leads to disintegration. Delegation of power would lead to greater patriotic feeling, greater national integration. This has been the experience so far, and the states for its survival should not depend on an overbearing center. If we can strengthen the technology of federalism, as Economic Survey calls it, then we can very well balance the principle of democracy as well. This article is from page number 7. Growth matters, but income levels matter more. This article obviously has been written in the backdrop of grim state of the economy. The author has provided a critique of the government's strategy to put economy back on track. According to his view, the focus rather should be on the demand side, the income level of individuals, rather than the income level of the country, that is the GDP. To begin with, let's quickly have the state of economy in mind, and then we'll begin with the prescription as provided by the author, and then we'll see the prescription offered by the author. In the recent NSO report, it has been admitted that India has gone through worst economic situation in last 41 years. In last 41 years, India has suffered for the first time economic recession. Economic recession is a state of economy where for 2 consecutive quarters the growth rate is negative. According to the report of RBI, the gross saving has declined from 34.6% in 2011-12 to around 31% in 2019-20. And the decline in gross saving has been largely because of decline in gross savings of household sector. This decline, although was going on and speeded up even before the pandemic broke out, but the situation has become even more worse when people are bringing out their golds, their small finance savings, deposits in NBFC, etc., on account of economic crisis that households are facing. On top of it, inflation has been breaching the upper limit of 6%. So in order to counter the present economic slowdown, put the economy back on track, Government of India has announced a relief package of 6.2 lakh crore. This is in addition to rupees 20 lakh crore that was already announced as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat package. Let's also have a little bit of background on the major contributor to our GDP. You know that according to the expenditure method, GDP is calculated as the summation of private final consumption expenditure, government final consumption expenditure, gross capital formation, and net exports. Private final consumption expenditure accounts for almost 60% of India's GDP. Private final consumption expenditure is actually household demand. This demand is in turn dependent upon a number of factors like income levels of people, employment status, certainty about future increase in income, etc. The COVID-19 pandemic no doubt has led to decrease in the income levels. There has been losses in jobs, greater uncertainty about future, and hence decrease in the overall demand. Unless the domestic demand revives, the Indian economy will not be able to register higher GDP growth. There is no debate in this. There is no two opinion on this. Domestic demand must revive. In response to the economic crisis and to revive the domestic demand, Government of India has come up with certain policy. The important aspect of it is Atmanirbhar Bharat package. And one of the most important pillar under Atmanirbhar Bharat package is to provide government guarantee on the loans given by the banks to certain sectors of economy like MSME, tourism, healthcare sectors, among others. The main focus of Atmanirbhar Bharat package is credit creation in the economy. And there is rationale for this. RBI has taken number of measures to improve the liquidity situation in the economy. And in spite of surplus liquidity, banks are reluctant to lend loans due to the fear of rising NPAs because of economic slowdown. Similarly, various business establishments are also reluctant to take loans due to the poor investment sentiment. Thus, there is a need to nudge the banks to lend to the private sector. Similarly, even the private sectors must be encouraged to take loans because the improvement in credit creation would have multifaceted benefits like increased investment, job creation, revival of demand, and hence boost to GDP growth rate. In this regard, the government has sought to improve credit creation by giving government guarantee for loans to the private sector. But this government guarantee is for chosen sectors that have been affected by COVID-19. But the author is not impressed by this idea of focusing just on credit creation. The author has highlighted the fact that the government has focused more on the supply side rather than enhancing the demand directly. The author argues that since the private final consumption expenditure, the domestic demand, is the major driver of the economy, the government must have focused more on it and tried to boost the demand in the economy. Boosting the demand directly could involve certain measures like tax reduction, direct cash transfers. Now you have to use your understanding of economy, the economics that you have studied so far, in order to analyze this point of view of author. You can either go with him or you can go ahead to counter the argument. You have to choose which way you will go, depending upon your understanding of economy, because there are different school of thoughts in economics, because there are different schools of thoughts in economy, and there could not be one unique solution to the economic problem. One can also argue that focusing on supply side has its own benefit. When you focus on supply side, demand is indirectly boosted. When you take supply side measures that boost production, helping in creation of employment opportunities, that increases the income level, which in turn increases the demand, and hence increasing the private final consumption expenditure, contributing to higher GDP growth. So even when the government is focusing on the supply side, demand is indirectly increased. And on top of that, everything is done bearing in mind the breach of fiscal deficit. The overall fiscal deficit of government already has increased to 9.5%, and the management of economy has to be done without government getting bankrupt. So one can say that the scope for reducing taxes and direct cash transfer on such a large scale may not be in the financial scope of the government. So government has tried to strike a balance here. Even when the government gives credit guarantee, it's not going to affect its finances much, because government would have to repay only for the loans that have been defaulted on. The other argument of author is when you focus on supply side, there is no immediate impact. The effect of the measures taken by the government can be seen only in medium term. Government has taken some long pending reforms like the Farm Act, National Infrastructure Pipeline, but these reforms will obviously not yield result immediately. The author also pitched forward the point that even when the government gives guarantee on loan, the credit creation in the economy has not improved. And recent data does suggest that. The banks are still reluctant, the private sector is still reluctant. The business sentiment has not improved so much. So the author prescribes that at this juncture, it is more important to increase income level of people rather than GDP growth rates. Focusing just on GDP growth rate will not be sustainable in long term if the income of households does not increase. The author rather puts a reverse to what we have talked about, that if the government focuses on enhancing the income level of people, automatically that will lead to higher GDP growth, because higher income level will cause higher domestic demand. This will encourage investment. More investment will create more job. More jobs will bring a more inclusive growth, and B, higher disposable income. Higher income will in turn create more demand, higher private final consumption expenditure, which is the major component of GDP, leading to higher GDP growth. Both the thoughts have their own merits and demerits. You must weigh upon both of them before making a final mind as to what should be the appropriate strategy, the right trajectory to bring economy out of the doldrums and start to make it run on the track again. Now answer these questions. I'll read out the question, give you 2 seconds of time. You try to be ahead of me. Think of the answer before I spell out the answer for you. Statement 1. Cabinet committee are constituted by the President. The Cabinet Committee have been recently formed by Prime Minister Modi. If you are reading the newspaper, you would know. The Cabinet Committees are constituted by Prime Minister, not President. False statement. Statement 2. Cabinet Committee on Security is headed by the Home Minister. Well, Cabinet Committee on the Parliamentary Affair is headed by the Home Minister. Cabinet Committee on Security is headed by the Prime Minister. False again. Statement 3. Cabinet Committee can take decisions which cannot be reviewed by the Cabinet. Well, no decision is final. The final decision comes only from the Supreme Court. Except in the case of, finish the sentence. The decision taken by Cabinet Committee can be very well reviewed by the Cabinet, and the decision taken by the Cabinet can be very well reviewed by the Supreme Court. Non-Cabinet ministers cannot become members of Cabinet Committee. Generally, the Cabinet ministers become the member of Cabinet Committee, but there is no bar on non-Cabinet ministers. The statement is false again. Cabinet committees are statutory bodies. They are neither constitutional nor statutory bodies. They are executive bodies. Principle of non-refoulement is part of guarantee under Article 21, irrespective of nationality. We have seen earlier in the case that in Dong Lian Kham versus Union of India case, Supreme Court stated this. What exactly has been written in the statement? So the statement is true. Private final consumption expenditure contributes 60% to the GDP growth. Absolutely correct, and hence Indian economy is called as demand-driven economy. Atmanirbhar Bharat package provide for government guarantee on loans to all sectors of economy. If there is all in the statement, you have to be very cautious, and in all likelihood, that statement will be incorrect. The fourth schedule to the Constitution provides for allocation of seats to the states in Rajya Sabha and not for union territories. It's an incorrect statement because it provides for both states and union territories. One can become the president of US even without majority of total national votes. It's a correct statement, and the stellar example for this are the President Donald Trump and George W. Bush. The allocation of seats in the Rajya Sabha is made on the basis of population of each state. This is also a correct statement. In the Lily Thomas versus Union of India case, Supreme Court ruled that MPs and MLAs convicted of a crime and awarded minimum of 5 years of imprisonment must lose membership of the House. The statement is incorrect because this is not 5 years, this is actually 2 years. You now have the question of the day on your screen. Please attempt the question, post your answer. You can also post the marks that you have got in the speed test. Try to take the DNS quiz on the eLearn platform as well. Goodbye. Take care.